The South China Sea, September 1944. A calm morning. 10 Japanese transport ships glide across the silver horizon. Below deck, thousands of men sweat in the darkness. Soldiers, engineers, nurses, even prisoners of war. They whisper prayers to reach Manila alive. Then the horizon flashes. Distant thunder. But it isn't weather. Out of the clouds dive black specks. U.S. Navy bombers, engines screaming like banshees. Sirens wail. Gunners scramble. A torpedo cuts the sea in half. Within minutes, steel burns. The water ignites with oil and bodies. Men jump, their uniforms on fire. But what came next was worse than any explosion. The survivors thought the attack was over, until the planes circled back. For decades, Japan would call it an atrocity. The Americans called it standard procedure. 3,000 men would enter the water. Almost none would see land again. This is the story of Convoy High 72, a fleet that never reached its destination, and a day when survival itself became a target. Singapore, September 21st, 1944. The docks reek of oil and fear. Convoy High 72 is ready to sail. 10 ships, a patchwork of transport freighters and troop carriers bound for Philippines. On board, 10,000 souls, Japan's last attempt to reinforce its collapsing island chain. To the men boarding the transports, it feels routine. They've made the trip before. Narrow bunks, rice rations, the rumble of engines under their feet. But this time, something's different. The sailors' eyes keep darting to the horizon. The escorts are too few, their fuel tanks half empty. Japan's merchant fleet once ruled these waters. Now it's prey. In the past 6 months, American submarines have sunk over half of all Japanese shipping in the Pacific. Whole convoys vanish without warning, tore apart by unseen hunters. And those hunters already know where High 72 is going. In a windowless hut on Guam, U.S. codebreakers intercept a radio transmission from Tokyo Naval Command. Exact route, speed, and timetable. They pass the coordinates to 3 submarines, USS Queenfish, USS Barb, and USS Ceylon II. The order is simple. Sink everything. At 1800 hours, High 72 leaves port under a thin mist. The captains whisper about luck. Some carry charms from home. Others hide sake bottles in their cabins. The escort destroyers form a protective triangle, a fragile illusion of safety. Below deck, soldiers sit shoulder to shoulder in stifling holds. Air vents barely work. The smell of sweat and diesel thickens. They joke half-heartedly. If the Americans come, maybe we'll finally get some fresh air. No one laughs. Sunset turns the sea blood orange. From the bridge of the Rikuyo Maru, Captain Shiro Hara studies the waves. If the enemy finds us, he tells his first officer, pray they kill us fast. 200 miles east, sonar pings echo through the hull of the USS Queenfish. Commander Charles Laughlin stares at his radar screen, 10 bright blips moving north at 8 knots. He doesn't know it yet, but that formation carries more men than many entire battles. He picks up the intercom. All hands. Battle stations. Inside the submarine, red lights flare. Torpedo doors is open. The crew moves with mechanical precision. 30 seconds to load. 10 seconds to aim, eternity to wait. The first volley launches at midnight. 6 torpedoes slice through the dark like glowing snakes. Moments later, the ocean explodes. The Rikuyo Maru is hit twice. Men are thrown from their bunks. Water and fire pour through the hull. Within minutes, the ship lifts violently. A soldier named Nakamura later writes in his diary, "The sea came for us faster than breath." Above the chaos, lifeboats drop too quickly. Most capsize. Others catch fire before touching the water. Sailors jump anyway. Anything is better than burning steel. By dawn, half the convoy is gone. Oil slicks stretch for miles. From the periscope of the Queenfish, Laughlin can see figures clinging to debris, hundreds of them. His first officer whispers, "Sir, they're everywhere." Laughlin lowers the scope. "We did our job." He doesn't say the rest aloud. God help them. Hours later, the Ceylon II finishes the work. Torpedoes tear through 2 more transports. including one carrying British and Australian POWs captured in Sumatra. Some of the prisoners managed to reach the surface. They waved desperately at the submarines, shouting in English. The American crews can hear the voices. No one knows they're prisoners. It's only after the attack ends that Laughlin receives a decoded manifest and realizes some of the men he killed were Allied. He writes a single line in his log. War is not precision. It's noise. The surviving ships scatter, engines choking on salt and smoke. By nightfall, they're limping through black water, hunted and haunted. Aboard the few remaining transports, officers debate whether to turn back. The radio crackles with fragmented distress calls, coordinates, screams, static, then silence. Captain Hara looks over the railing of what's left of the convoy. Flames dance on the horizon. He counts 6 burning hulks and whispers, "We are next." Below, men pray. Some whisper names of their wives. Others curse the Emperor. The sea offers no reply. At 2 a.m., the surviving Japanese ships cut their lights and vanish into the mist. Behind them, thousands of men float among the wrecks, some wounded, some barely conscious, all believing rescue will come with dawn. But the dawn will bring something else entirely, something no one on either side will ever forget. The ocean that morning was calm, too calm. From beneath the surface, it looked almost peaceful, a blue ceiling glowing faintly through periscope glass. But inside the USS Queenfish, peace didn't exist. Every man could feel it, that metallic vibration in the air before the hunt. Commander Charles Laughlin stood barefoot on the steel deck, headphones pressed against his ears. Through the static came the faint rhythm of propellers. Slow, steady, massive. He raised one finger. Contact. Bearing 085. They'd found the rest of Convoy High, 72. Dive to 150 feet, he ordered. The Queenfish slipped deeper into shadow, engines humming like a heartbeat. To men inside, time slowed. Sweat ran down their necks, even in the cold. A torpedo man whispered prayer. Another checked his stopwatch. At exactly 0900 hours, Laughlin gave the word. Fire 1. The torpedo slid from its tube with a hiss. 5 seconds later, another, then another. From the periscope, they watched the explosions bloom like underwater suns. 1, 2, 3, each detonation punching columns of smoke through the sea. A young lookout murmured, "God Almighty." Laughlin didn't answer. He just said, "Reload." They weren't done. Half a mile away, the USS Cillian II and USS Bar joined in. The 3 submarines formed a triangle around the convoy, a perfect ambush box. The Japanese destroyers fired depth charges blindly, their blasts echoing like thunder underwater. Each concussion rattled teeth, cracked bulbs, and sent paint flakes raining down inside the Queenfish. But the American subs stayed silent, moving like ghosts through the deep. On the surface, it was chaos. The transporter Kitsumaru took 2 hits amidships and vanished in a geyser flame. Another ship, the Rikyomaru, began to list, hundreds of men crowding the rails. Some jumped, others burned. Through his periscope, Laughlin could see them, hundreds of tiny shapes flailing among the debris. He whispered to his XO, "There must be thousands." The XO nodded grimly. "They keep sending them, sir, and we keep sending them down." What none of them knew yet was that many of those men weren't enemy troops. They were Allied prisoners of war, British and Australian soldiers captured in Singapore 2 years earlier. But underwater, there was no way to tell. On the radar, a human life looked like just another blip. At 1,100 hours, the Queenfish rose to periscope depth. Smoke blanketed the horizon. A convoy that had started the week with 10 ships now had 3. "Surface," Laughlin ordered. As they broke through the waves, the crew opened the hatch. A blast of hot air and the smell of burning oil rushed in. The ocean looked alive. Thousands of men floating among splintered wood and black slicks of fuel. They were waving, shouting in Japanese, some even in English. One of the gunners hesitated. "Sir, they're survivors." Laughlin's face tightened. "We can't take prisoners. We can't help them." He didn't add the unspoken truth. Surfacing to rescue them could expose the submarine to attack. The men stood silently, staring at the sea that moments ago had been their target. For the first time, they could see the faces, young, terrified, human. "Close the hatch," Laughlin said finally. "We have to move." As the sub slipped beneath the surface again, muffled screams echoed through the hull. No one spoke for hours. Later that night, Laughlin wrote in his log, "This war turns killers into witnesses." Miles away, Commander Eugene Fluckey aboard the USS Barb watched the last transport burn from his own periscope. He'd sunk ships before, but never so many at once. He turned to his helmsman. "They won't forget this." The helmsman asked, "Sir, who won't?" Fluckey answered quietly, "Anyone who saw it." When morning came, the sea was empty again, except for debris and bodies. But the story didn't end there, because by afternoon, the sky would open, and the hunters beneath the waves would be joined by predators above them. And what those pilots saw would blur the line between victory and vengeance forever. By midday, the smoke had climbed so high that pilots of Task Force 38 could see it from 70 miles away. To them, it looked like another target-rich patch of ocean, a cluster of burning hulks that still might hide guns or reinforcements. Commander David McCampbell, the Navy's top ace, led his Hellcat squadron over clouds of smoke and flame. His orders were crisp and simple. Sweep the area. Destroy all enemy assets. Leave nothing that floats. From above, the sea didn't look human. It moved. Thousands of dark shapes, spread across miles, bobbed between the wrecks. "Looks like rafts," one gunner radioed. "Could be troops regrouping." McCampbell hesitated for 2 seconds, the longest pause of his career. Then came the voice from the carrier. "Confirm engagement." .50 caliber machine guns opened up. Bullets stitched the water in long silver lines. Where a moment ago were waving hands, now there was only spray. To the pilots, it was procedure, identifying and neutralizing survivors who might climb aboard lifeboats and man the guns again. To the men below, it was madness. Japanese sailors shouted, "Yami, stop," but the engines drowned them out. Others tried to dive beneath the surface, only to rise gasping into a storm of lead. A few waved white cloths torn from shirts, signs invisible from clouds. One American pilot later wrote in his diary, "We didn't see people. We saw movement." Down below, the sea turned into chaos again. Oil slicks ignited under tracer fire. Bodies burned on top of the water. Some survivors tried to cling to debris. Others let go, disappearing quietly. Then something unexpected happened. One plane broke formation and circled low. The pilot, Lieutenant Jack Hammond, saw the truth through the smoke. These weren't soldiers assembling. They were shipwrecked men, many already dead. He pulled up and shouted into his radio, "They're unarmed. Ceasefire." Static answered him. The roar of guns continued. After the mission, Hammond refused to file his gun camera footage. He'd seen too much. Years later, he admitted, "I followed orders, but I stopped seeing enemies that day. I started seeing faces." Back in Japan, word of the attack spread through rumor, not news. The Imperial Navy classified the event immediately, admitting thousands had died helpless in the sea would crush morale. But among the few survivors who washed ashore, the story grew, American planes circling again and again, strafing the living and the dying alike. Some called it vengeance for Pearl Harbor. Others called it madness born of fatigue. Even the Americans who recorded the operation in logbooks never agreed on what it meant. Some saw it as a cost of war, destroy everything that might fight back. Others whispered the question that would haunt them for decades. At what point does victory become cruelty? By sunset, the last American aircraft banked away. The smoke drifted east of the wind, leaving nothing but an ocean stained with fuel and silence. No ships came to rescue. No radio signals were sent. For those still alive in the water, the night ahead would be a slow reckoning. Salt on open wounds, sharks drawn by the blood, and a sky that finally went dark. Night swallowed the South China Sea. The flames that had turned day to hell now flickered out, leaving only a black sheet of oil and starlight. The sound that replaced the gunfire was worse. the low, ragged moaning of the wounded drifting with the waves. For the first time in days, the sea was quiet enough to hear breathing and dying. Somewhere among the debris, a young Japanese signalman named Masao clung to a floating beam. His uniform was gone, skin blistered from oil and sun. Every few minutes he called into the dark, "Is anyone there?" The ocean answered with silence, and sometimes faint tapping from other pieces of wreckage. He wasn't alone. Hundreds still floated nearby, some alive, most not. The currents had gathered them into clusters, as if the sea was building islands of the dead. A few survivors shared sips of rainwater cupped in their hands. Others, delirious, drank seawater and went mad. Masao would later recall, "When the planes left, I thought we were saved." But the night was worse than the fire. By the second day, the sun became their executioner. It turned the ocean into a mirror, blinding, merciless. Oil coated everything, blackening faces until they no longer looked human. Men hallucinated voices calling them home. Some stripped off their clothes and swam toward the horizon, believing they saw islands that weren't there. One officer kept reciting the imperial anthem until his voice broke. Another whispered apologies to the men he couldn't save. Each hour blurred into the next until time itself drowned. Sharks came with the third night. At first, no one noticed. A soft bump against a leg, a swirl of movement beneath the slick. Then the scream started. "Shark! Shark!" The water erupted in thrashing and blood. Masao pressed his face against the wood, whispering a prayer not to be touched. He felt one brush against him, rough, cold, indifferent. It moved on. By dawn, there was less shouting. The sea was feeding quietly. Back on land, no rescue orders were issued. Japan had lost contact with the convoy and assumed all ships destroyed. The U.S. Navy, convinced the area was still hostile, declared a kill zone. No one went back. For 5 days, the survivors floated through a wasteland of wreckage, planks, corpses, crates of rice spilling into the waves. Some men tied themselves together with belts so they wouldn't drift apart. When one died, the others cut him loose. Masao later said he stopped counting bodies after the second sunrise. There were too many. It was like the sea had grown eyes that stared back. On the 6th day, a faint vibration reached them. Engines. Hope surged. They waved, shouted, cried. But the silhouette on the horizon wasn't Japanese or American. It was a neutral freighter from Portugal, the Carvalho Araújo, drawn by chance into the ghostly field of debris. The captain ordered the crew to lower lifeboats. They hauled aboard dozens of survivors, blistered, skeletal, half mad. One sailor said, "They looked like shadows pretending to be men." Masao was among the last rescued. When they pulled him onto the deck, he begged them to go back for others. The captain pointed to the horizon. "There are no others." He turned and saw that the sea, once crowded with life, had gone strangely empty. The waves rolled over the dead like a shroud. Weeks later, when the U.S. Navy surveyed the area, they found nothing. No wrecks, no corpses, only oil drifting in long black ribbons. It was as if the ocean had buried its own evidence. Japan never published a full casualty count. Estimates varied. Some said 2,000 lost, others more than 3,000. The survivors were interrogated, sworn to silence, told the event was classified. But silence is never perfect. Stories leaked through fishermen, through families of the missing, through the few who couldn't stop dreaming of a sea. They spoke of a place where the ocean whispered in Japanese and English alike, voices of men who never went home. Years later, locals called that stretch of water the Sea of Ghosts. Fishermen refused to cast nets there. Divers claimed their radios crackled with voices that didn't belong to the living. Maybe superstition, or maybe memory refusing to drown. Because history forgot Convoy High 72, but the ocean did not. And under its quiet surface, the ghosts still waited for acknowledgement, for forgiveness, for something the war never gave them: peace. When the war ended, the oceans grew quiet again, but the ghosts of Convoy High 72 didn't. They drifted through paperwork, rumors, and half-erased reports that no one wanted open. In Tokyo, The families of the missing waited for telegrams that never came. Months later, a single line appeared in a military bulletin. Convoy High, 72 lost at sea, presumed sunk. No details, no numbers, no names. The survivors who returned were told to forget. Their testimonies were buried under state secrets and shame, admitting that thousands had been left die and that some were killed even after the battle didn't fit Japan's narrative of honor, so silence became policy. Across the Pacific, American archivists filed their own reports away under the label Standard Engagement. But inside veterans' bars, the conversations turned uneasy. A few pilots confessed to nightmares, of faces in the water, of men waving before vanishing under machine gun fire. One wrote in a letter decades later, "We weren't taught how to tell the difference between mercy and victory." Historians who pieced together the logs noticed the gaps immediately. Missing timestamps, coordinates that didn't match, eyewitness accounts that contradicted official records. It was as though both sides had quietly agreed. Some truths were too heavy to keep above water, yet fragments survived. A Portuguese sailor's journal described pulling half-dead men from the sea. A Japanese medic's diary told of watching comrades die from thirst while aircraft circled overhead. Put together, their stories formed a mosaic more haunting than any headline, an image of war stripped of glory, reduced to instinct and terror. By the 1970s, researchers began calling the event a forgotten massacre. Not because it lacked evidence, but because it lacked will. No court tried it, no government apologized for it. It was easier to let it fade into myth than confront the uncomfortable question it raised. What happens to morality when the enemy can no longer fight back? For those who study war, that question matters more than ever. Technology may change, weapons may evolve, but the psychology of vengeance, that split second where duty becomes cruelty, remains the same. Modern military ethicists now use incidents like Convoy High 72 in lectures about combat behavior, communication failure, and the fog of perception. One Navy historian summarized it simply: the farther we get from the target, the easier it is to forget it was human. In recent years, divers have searched for the wrecks. They found nothing, only shifting sand, the trace of a hull, and silence. But sometimes, they say, the current carries small relics upward: a rusted helmet, a corroded buckle, a fragment of porcelain dish. Each piece rises for a moment, catches the light, and sinks again. Those who've seen it call it the ocean's memory, fleeting, partial, but impossible to erase. The story of Convoy High 72 isn't just about who fired or who died. It's about what war does to judgment, how victory blinds, and how the line between necessity and vengeance can vanish faster than smoke on the water. In the end, the sea kept its own ledger. No statues, no medals, just an endless blue grave that whispers, "Remember what we became when mercy disappeared." The South China Sea still hides its secrets, but every wreck, every ripple, is a reminder that war's truest battlefield isn't land or sky, it's conscience. If stories like this make you look at history differently, subscribe for more moments the textbooks left buried beneath the waves.